The Justin family backyard in Coyoacan was alive with laughter and the smell of grilled corn. Children ran around, chasing each other, while the adults clinked glasses under the warm Mexican sun. Sofia Herrera, a dedicated nurse, had come to visit the Justin during her day off, bringing homemade pastries and a bright smile. Everything seemed ordinary, almost too ordinary. But as the laughter echoed, a low rumble of motorcycles grew louder in the distance, unnoticed at first. Suddenly, the air shattered with a violent crash. Black SUVs screeched to a halt at the edge of the property, and masked figures, members of the ruthless gang of Zumba, burst out with guns raised. Panic erupted. Sofia froze as she watched the gang split, dragging Mr. Roberto Justin and his wife, Elena, toward the vehicles. Shouts and screams filled the air as neighbors ran for cover. The once sunny afternoon had been stained by fear. Sofia tried to intervene, but a gunshot cracked through the air, making her flinch to the ground. She watched helplessly as the gang shoved the Justin into the SUVs, doors slamming with a metallic bang. The motorcycles roared to life, leaving tire marks in the dusty yard. In mere minutes, the sunlit scene had transformed into a nightmare of violence and helplessness. Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat echoing the thought, "Why me? Why now?" By the time the dust settled, the backyard was silent, except for Sofia's sobs and the distant echo of tires on the cobblestone streets of Coyoacan. She stumbled to the edge of the property, looking at the empty SUVs and the chaos that had just unfolded. The Justin, the beloved doctors who had healed so many, were gone. And deep down, Sofia knew this was not just a kidnapping, it was a calculated strike by a gang that thrived on fear. Sofia fell to her knees, gripping the grass like it could anchor her to reality. She tried to remember every detail, the tattoos, the masks, the color of the SUVs. Her mind raced, knowing that every second counted. Somewhere in her heart, a single thought echoed relentlessly. The police, they must stop them. They must bring them to justice. It was a prayer whispered into the sunlight, a hope that she clung to as the horror of the day began to sink in. Detective Alejandro Alex Morales walked into the Mexico City police precinct with a grim sense of urgency. At 35, he had seen his share of kidnappings, but something about the Justin case gnawed at him. The CCTV footage, shown over and over, revealed the precision of the gang of Zumba, black SUVs, masked faces, and coordinated moves that spoke of experience. Alejandro's eyes narrowed as he paused the footage on the gang leader, El Lobo, a cold silhouette orchestrating chaos. This wasn't a random crime, it was a statement. He gathered his team, including Officer Marta Rojas, his trusted partner. Maps of Mexico City were spread across the table, marked with the gang's known operations. Every street, alleyway, and hideout was analyzed. Alejandro's voice cut through the tension. "We don't wait. We track. We hit them where it hurts. The Justin lives, and Sofia's, depend on it." His words hung in the room like a promise of vengeance. Back at the crime scene, forensic teams combed the Justin property for evidence. Alejandro returned to the backyard, now cordoned off, where the flowers and decorations were trampled into chaos. He knelt, inspecting tire marks and scattered debris, mentally piecing together the gang's escape route. Every detail mattered: tattoos, license plates, the type of firearms used. These fragments would be the thread that unraveled the gang's plan. Meanwhile, news cameras captured the city's reaction. The Justin family's popularity made this kidnapping national news. Citizens filled social media with outrage and fear. Alejandro knew that public pressure was mounting, but he also knew that rushing would play into the gang's hands. They thrived on chaos. He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down. This wasn't just a case, it was a race against time. By evening, Alejandro visited the hospital to check on Sofia. She was still in shock, whispering fragments about the gang and their methods. Though unconscious, her fear and pain were palpable. Alejandro clenched his fists, silently vowing, "I will bring them to justice. No one hurts her. No one hurts Justin and gets away with it." His reflection in the hospital window merged with the glowing lights of Mexico City, a lone figure determined to confront darkness. That night, Alejandro returned home, but couldn't sleep. He reviewed the gang's prior crimes, noting patterns, weaknesses, and possible hideouts. Every file he read strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just law enforcement, it was a personal mission. Sophia's last wish, whispered into the chaos of her collapsing world, had ignited a fire in him that would not be extinguished until the gang of Zumba faced justice. Sofia Herrera paced the hospital corridor, her hands trembling as she replayed the scene from Justin Backyard over and over in her mind. The trauma of watching the couple she cared for being kidnapped, and knowing the danger that still lurked, was suffocating. She felt the walls closing in, each heartbeat pounding like a drum of impending doom. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed against the cold tiles, clutching her chest as dizziness overwhelmed her. Doctors rushed to her side. Dr. Julio Alvarez, a close friend and colleague, knelt beside her, shouting her name. Nurses held her steady while monitors beeped erratically. Sophia's lips quivered as she tried to speak, fragments of words escaping. The gang bring justice. She fell unconscious, her body succumbing to a mixture of shock, grief, and exhaustion. The hospital room filled with urgency, each beep and sigh marking the gravity of the situation. Alejandro received the call just as he was preparing files for the next day's investigation. He rushed to the hospital, adrenaline surging through his veins. When he entered the ICU, he saw Sofia lying motionless, tubes and monitors surrounding her fragile form. His jaw clenched as he approached her bed, gripping the railing. Though unconscious, he could feel the weight of her fear and desperation. He whispered under his breath, "I promise I will get them. I swear it." Sofia's last words before slipping fully into the coma had been clear. "Bring them to justice for the Justins." Alejandro repeated her plea silently, the words echoing in his mind as a mantra. Each beat of the heart monitor seemed to reinforce the urgency of his mission. He knew the clock was ticking, and the gang of Zumba would not stop until their traces were covered. Her life, fragile as it was, depended on his success. That night, Alejandro sat in the hospital chapel, reviewing his notes and planning the next move. He flipped through photos of the gang, study maps, and CCTV screenshots. Every detail mattered. He could feel Sofia's presence like a weight on his conscience, guiding his focus. The words of her last wish haunted him, pushing him beyond fatigue, beyond fear. He would not rest until the gang of Zumba paid for what they had done. The scene at the ICU left a deep mark on him. The hospital staff whispered about the nurse's near-death experience, yet Alejandro didn't speak to anyone. He knew this mission was now personal. Sofia's unconscious plea had become his guiding force. Every lead, every stakeout, every dangerous confrontation would be fueled by her last wish. There was no room for error, not when lives hung in the balance. The city lights of Mexico City flickered outside Alejandro Morales' apartment window as he stared at the crime boards he had spent the night updating. Photos of El Lobo, Cobra, and La Serpiente were pinned in precise order, strings connecting past crimes, hideouts, and potential escape routes. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face, the weight of Sofia's last words pressing on him. "Bring them to justice." The words echoed like a hammer in his mind, awakening a determination he hadn't felt in years. He rose and paced, each step measured and deliberate. Memories of Sofia's collapse played in his mind like a haunting montage. He remembered her whispering those words, fragile but firm, before the coma took her away. Alejandro's jaw tightened as he spoke aloud, a vow whispered to the empty apartment. "I swear it, Sofia. I will stop them. I will bring them to justice. No one escapes." The next morning, Alejandro was already at the precinct, briefing Officer Marta Rojas on a new strategy. He laid out every lead he had compiled, from the gang's prior operations to the specific tattoos identified during the Justin kidnapping. Marta listened, her brow furrowed in concentration. Alejandro knew he couldn't do this alone, but the responsibility, the promise to Sofia, was entirely his. Every lead mattered, Every decision could bring them closer or end in disaster. Alejandro returned to the Justin family's home, now cordoned off by police tape. He inspected every detail, replaying the crime in his mind. He memorized tire tracks, footprints, broken decorations, anything that could provide a clue. The shadows of the backyard stretched long in the afternoon sun, reminders of the terror that had struck that family. Every detail was a puzzle piece, every observation a potential breakthrough. That evening, Alejandro returned to Sofia's hospital room. She was still unconscious, monitors beeping rhythmically. He stood by her bedside, placing a hand gently on hers. He whispered the vow again, a personal pledge that carried more weight than any law. I will find them. I will stop them. I will make sure you're safe, Sofia. And I will bring justice for the Justins. In that moment, he felt an unspoken bond between them, a responsibility that transcended duty. Alejandro spent the rest of the night reviewing police files, gang dossiers, and intelligence reports. He studied every crime scene the gang had ever touched, every small detail that could give him an edge. His apartment became a war room, a strategy hub where every map, every photograph, and every piece of intelligence aligned with one goal: fulfilling Sofia's last wish. Failure was not an option. By dawn, Alejandro had formulated a plan. He would start with the weakest link in the gang, hoping to gather information that would lead to the capture of El Lobo. Every move from here on out would be precise, calculated, and dangerous. Alejandro knew one thing: the clock was ticking, and Sofia's life, and her last wish, depended on his success. Alejandro knew the key to stopping the gang of Zumba was understanding them. Late one night, he sat alone in the precinct's intelligence room, poring over crime reports, surveillance photos, and news clippings. Patterns began to emerge. The gang never left witnesses alive. Each heist or kidnapping was executed with military precision, and their leader, El Lobo, was always 2 steps ahead. Alejandro felt a chill. This was no ordinary gang. They were predators, and Mexico City was their hunting ground. He focused on the leader, El Lobo, and his right hand, Cobra. Alejandro studied every detail: tattoos, escape routes, known associates. He realized the gang had eyes everywhere: informants in neighborhoods, hospital staff, even street vendors. Trust would be scarce, and mistakes deadly. Alejandro's determination hardened. If he wanted justice for Sofia and the Justins, he would have to outthink predators who thrived in chaos. To gather more intel, Alejandro tapped into informants in the city's underground network. Street vendors, former gang associates, and neighbors provided whispers of movement. The gang was consolidating, preparing for something bigger. Alejandro made careful notes, each piece of information a thread leading him closer to the truth. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the storm brewing in its streets. Alejandro's investigation revealed a chilling fact: El Lobo's gang had a network of safe houses across Mexico City, and every member had a specialization. Cobra was the sniper, precise and ruthless. Los Sopiente was the insider, able to manipulate situations from within. Alejandro realized that capturing one member wouldn't be enough. They had to dismantle the entire operation. The stakes were higher than ever. That night, Alejandro visited the Justin backyard again, retracing the gang's steps in his mind. The shadows of past chaos seemed to linger, reminding him of Sofia's fragile state and the lives at stake. Every decision from here on would be critical. He vowed silently. He would uncover every secret, infiltrate every hideout, and bring El Lobo and his gang to justice, no matter the cost. By the end of the night, Alejandro had a plan: start with the weakest link, gather intel, and slowly tighten the noose around El Lobo's network. Every lead, every move, would be calculated with surgical precision. For Sofia. For the Justins. For justice. The hunt was beginning, and the gang of Zumba would soon realize that Alejandro Morales was no ordinary detective. Alejandro's eyes scanned the latest batch of CCTV footage from a street in Iztapalapa, replaying the Justin kidnapping over and over. Then, a small detail caught his attention: a fleeting glimpse of a tattoo on a masked gang member's wrist, a snake coiling tightly around the forearm. His pulse quickened. Tattoos were personal, they could be traced. This tiny fragment of evidence might be the thread that unraveled the entire gang. He cross-referenced the tattoo with previous gang records. His instincts were right. The snake belonged to one of Los Serpientes' known associates. Alejandro's mind raced. This wasn't just a random mark, it was a signature, a calling card. He grabbed his phone, dialing Officer Marta Rojas to mobilize a stakeout team. Time was critical. The gang was always on the move, and any delay could mean losing the trail forever. The following morning, Alejandro and Marta parked on a rooftop overlooking a narrow alley in Iztapalapa. They observed the street quietly, binoculars in hand, hearts pounding as a black SUV slowly entered. Alejandro recognized the vehicle from the CCTV footage. The gang was moving again. He whispered to Marta, "This is it. Stay sharp. Any sudden move, and we act." Suddenly, the SUV stopped. One masked gang member stepped out, unaware of the detectives observing him from above. Alejandro noted his movements, the way he checked the street for threats. Every detail, tattoos, gait, clothing, was burned into Alejandro's memory. This was a chance to confirm the identity of a gang member and finally gain leverage. He signaled Marta, ready to make the first move. A sudden glint caught Alejandro's eye, a reflection from a sniper scope on a nearby rooftop. Cobra, the gang's marksman, was watching the street. Alejandro froze, realizing how dangerous this operation had become. One wrong step, and the gang could strike at any moment. The clue they had, a tattoo, a vehicle, a routine, was now a lifeline and a trap simultaneously. Alejandro knew he had to act with precision. He quickly documented every detail: the tattoo, the SUV, the gang member's posture, and Cobra's sniper position. Alejandro's mind raced as he pieced together a plan. This first clue might be small, but it was the foundation of everything. With it, he could start dismantling the gang's network, one calculated step at a time. Sophia's last wish echoed in his mind, pushing him beyond fear. Bring them to justice. By nightfall, Alejandro had compiled the evidence, briefed Marta, and outlined a preliminary strike plan. The first clue, so small, almost invisible, had become the spark of hope. Every heartbeat reminded him. The gang was cunning, ruthless, and always moving. But Alejandro Morales was relentless. For Sofia, for the Justins, and for the people of Mexico City, he would follow this clue wherever it led. Alejandro crouched behind a concrete ledge, eyes fixed on Cobra perched atop a nearby rooftop. The sniper's scope glinted under the fading sun, a silent warning of the danger waiting. Alejandro's pulse quickened. One misstep, one wrong movement, and the gang could strike with lethal precision. He signaled Marta to hold her position, his mind calculating every angle. This wasn't just about catching a gang member, it was about survival. Suddenly, Cobra adjusted his scope, scanning the streets below. Alejandro knew the slightest exposure would give him away. He whispered to Marta, "We need a distraction. Now." Marta tossed a small flare across the street. It exploded in bright red sparks, drawing Cobra's attention. Alejandro seized the moment, moving swiftly across the rooftop, keeping low, his every step measured against the deadly sniper gaze. The chase escalated as Cobra realized the movement and fired a shot. The bullet whizzed past Alejandro, hitting the concrete with a deafening crack. Dust exploded around him as he rolled to cover. His heart pounded, adrenaline surging. He knew this was no ordinary confrontation. The sniper was calculating, deadly, and familiar with the rooftops of Mexico City. One wrong move, and the mission would fail before it even began. Alejandro's mind raced. He had to neutralize Cobra without alerting the rest of the gang. Using the shadows of nearby air conditioning units, he advanced, every movement synchronized with the city's rhythm. Cobra adjusted, his rifle trained, but Alejandro's strategy was precise. A rapid dash to the rooftop's edge, a leap that brought him behind Cobra's blind spot. In a heartbeat, Alejandro disarmed Cobra, the rifle clattering across the rooftop. Cobra lunged, but Alejandro's training and resolve proved stronger. Within seconds, he had secured the sniper, tying him up using a makeshift restraint. Cobra's glare burned with anger, but Alejandro's calm, determined eyes told him the tables had turned. This first deadly encounter had been survived, and Alejandro now had a foothold in the gang's operations. Breathing heavily, Alejandro signaled Marta to secure the perimeter. He searched Cobra for any intel, finding a phone with encrypted messages, maps, and names of safe houses. This was the first tangible breakthrough in the investigation. Alejandro's mind raced. Each piece of information was a key, a step closer to dismantling the gang of Zumba, fulfilling Sofia's last wish, and avenging the Justins. As the night settled over Mexico City, Alejandro reflected on the encounter. It had been close, almost deadly, but he had survived. The first clue had led to the first confrontation, and now the hunt was truly on. He whispered softly to himself, as if Sofia could hear him. "I will bring them to justice. No one escapes." And for the first time, he felt that the gang's network might finally have cracks big enough for justice to slip through. Alejandro sat alone in his apartment, the captured Cobra tied in a chair across from him at the precinct. He studied the maps, encrypted messages, and gang member profiles. Yet something gnawed at him. The subtle details Sofia had mentioned before collapsing. Her insights, though fragmented, were the key to understanding the gang's patterns. Every whispered word she had spoken in the hospital now echoed in his mind. Watch, patterns, safe houses. He began analyzing every movement of the gang of Zumba since the Justin kidnapping. Every vehicle, street, and hideout was cross-referenced with Sofia's insights. Slowly, Alejandro noticed a pattern. The gang always moved between safe houses along streets with certain landmarks, corner markets, small clinics, and abandoned warehouses. Sofia's observations, now a silent guide, were helping him connect the dots. Alejandro realized he needed more direct evidence to confront the gang. Using Cobra as leverage, he pressured the captured member into revealing details about safe houses and scheduled movements. The information was fragmented but valuable. Alejandro cross-checked it with Sofia's subtle hints, building a mental map of the gang's operations. Slowly, he felt a spark of hope. As the night deepened, Alejandro plotted a cautious surveillance operation. He and Marta would stake out the first identified safe house at dawn. Every precaution was considered: backup routes, escape plans, and possible ambushes. Alejandro's mind raced, combining Sofia's silent guidance, Cobra's reluctant confessions, and his own tactical experience. This operation could be their first real breakthrough, or a deadly trap. Before dawn, Alejandro visited Sofia in the hospital. Though unconscious, he spoke to her, explaining the plan as if she could hear. "I'll check the safe house, Sofia. I'll bring the gang down. We're one step closer, I promise." His words were a vow, a silent bond between detective and nurse. Even in her silence, Alejandro felt her presence guiding his next move. By sunrise, Alejandro and Marta were positioned near the gang's first safe house. The streets of Mexico City were slowly coming to life, unaware of the confrontation about to unfold. Alejandro's heart raced, but Sofia's silent guidance gave him clarity. Every movement, every decision, was now calculated with a precision born of intuition, experience, and a promise to fulfill a nurse's last wish. Alejandro and Marta crouched behind parked cars a few blocks from the safe house in Iztapalapa. The morning air was crisp, but tension crackled like electricity. Alejandro's eyes never left the building, a dilapidated warehouse, nondescript but teeming with danger inside. Every instinct screamed caution. The gang of Zumba was notorious for traps and ambushes. Alejandro whispered to Marta, "We go in slow, quiet. Any noise, and they'll know we're here." Using night vision cameras and binoculars, they scanned the perimeter. 2 masked gang members patrolled outside, rifles slung casually but alert. Alejandro memorized their routines, noting a pattern. They rotated every 5 minutes. Timing would be everything. He signaled Marta, and together they moved into position, hearts pounding, every muscle primed for action. Suddenly, a door creaked. One of the gang members inside shifted, unaware that the detectives had pinpointed their blind spots. Alejandro pressed his lips together, signaling Marta to hold. Every breath, every heartbeat, seemed amplified. Then, using a small, silent device, he jammed the gang's radios, cutting off their communication. The first step of the raid had begun. They breached the warehouse quietly, moving from shadow to shadow. Alejandro's training took over, silent hand signals, calculated steps, eyes scanning every corner. In the dim interior, crates and debris created perfect hiding spots for the gang. Suddenly, a masked figure appeared, rifle raised. Alejandro reacted instantly, subduing the gang member with a swift, precise maneuver. Marta secured the exit while Alejandro continued inward, determined to find key evidence. Inside, Alejandro found a small stash of phones, maps, and documents detailing gang operations. Each file revealed safe houses, scheduled kidnappings, and contacts across the city. Alejandro's heart raced. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. He photographed every piece of evidence, knowing that it could lead to dismantling the gang of Zumba entirely. Suddenly, a shout echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Another gang member had entered unnoticed. Alejandro and Marta moved with lightning speed, neutralizing the threat before any alarms could be raised. The warehouse fell silent again, tension replaced by the adrenaline of victory. Alejandro knew this was only the beginning, but it was the first major victory in the pursuit of justice for Sofia and the Justins. By midday, the first safe house had been secured, evidence cataloged, and Cobra's intel confirmed. Alejandro and Marta had successfully navigated the first confrontation, learning more about the gang's structure and strength. Alejandro felt a surge of hope but also knew the danger was far from over. The gang of Zumba was vast, ruthless, and still out there. Every step forward would be a battle, but Alejandro Morales was ready to fight for Sofia, for the Justins, and for justice itself. Alejandro sat in the precinct late at night, reviewing the files retrieved from the first safe house. As he cross-referenced names and addresses, something unusual caught his attention. Several payments and favors traced back to a city official, someone trusted and supposedly above suspicion. His pulse quickened. Could the gang of Zumba have a corrupt ally in the government itself? If so, Sofia's last wish would be even harder to fulfill than he had imagined. He grabbed a photo of the official, Luis Herrera, head of a small municipal office, and compared it with surveillance footage from the gang's movements. Alejandro's stomach tightened. The official had met with gang members in public spaces multiple times, always under the guise of routine government meetings. Alejandro realized that any direct confrontation could tip the gang off, and the corrupt official might be feeding them critical information. Alejandro shared his findings with Marta. She frowned deeply, the weight of the revelation sinking in. "This complicates everything," she said. Alejandro nodded grimly. They were no longer just hunting a gang. They were navigating a web of corruption that threatened to derail the investigation. Trust had become a scarce commodity. To gather more evidence, Alejandro devised a plan to surveil the official's next public appearance. Using cameras, undercover officers, and street-level informants, he monitored Luis Herrera from a distance. Every movement, every interaction, was meticulously documented. Alejandro realized this was delicate. One misstep could blow their cover and alert both the gang and the corrupt official. Days passed as Alejandro pieced together the connection. Money, favors, and insider information flowed from Luis Herrera to the gang, allowing them to evade police raids and stay one step ahead. Alejandro felt a mix of anger and determination. Sofia's last wish, once a personal motivator, had become a battle against a system that allowed evil to thrive. Finally, Alejandro decided it was time to confront the truth. He called a trusted internal affairs contact, arranging a confidential meeting. He needed support, evidence verification, and a plan to bring both the gang and the corrupt official to justice. The stakes had never been higher. Failure could mean the loss of both the investigation and Sofia's chance for justice. Alejandro reflected on the journey so far. From the Justin kidnapping to Cobra's capture and now a corrupt official feeding the gang, the path had become far more treacherous. But he was undeterred. Each challenge only strengthened his resolve. Sophia's silent guidance, his strategic mind, and relentless pursuit of justice would not allow the gang of Zumba, or their allies, to escape accountability. Alejandro sat at his apartment, maps and photos sprawled across every surface. He traced the gang's known movements, overlaying intel from Cobra, Sophia's hints, and the corrupt officials' interactions. It was complex, like a chessboard, and Alejandro was determined to think several moves ahead. He needed a plan precise enough to hit multiple targets without tipping the gang off, but flexible enough to adapt to the unexpected. He called Marta, explaining the plan. We hit 3 safe houses simultaneously. Cobra's intel gives us timing. Luis Herrera's meetings give us predictability. We move fast, clean, and coordinated. Any mistake, and it all blows up in our faces. Marta nodded, understanding the gravity of the operation. They would need backup, stealth, and perfect timing to make it succeed. At dawn, Alejandro and his team were in position. Each safe house was surveilled, entry points mapped, and contingencies prepared. Alejandro's heart raced. One of these raids could finally cripple the gang of Zumba, but one wrong move could end in disaster. He whispered Sophia's name silently, drawing strength from her silent guidance. For you, Sophia. Justice will be done. The first raid began with Alejandro's team silently breaching a safe house in Iztapalapa. Inside, gang members were caught off guard, scrambling in confusion. Alejandro moved with calculated precision, neutralizing threats, securing evidence, and coordinating with backup units. The warehouse quickly fell under control, marking the first victory in the coordinated strike. Simultaneously, Marta's team secured the second safe house, capturing several gang members and uncovering documents linking them to future crimes. Alejandro monitored the operation via radio, heart pounding as every move was relayed. Cobra's intel had been invaluable. Timing and positioning had saved lives and prevented chaos. The third safe house revealed the shocking truth. Luis Herrera, the corrupt official, had been meeting with gang leaders right inside the building. Alejandro couldn't believe his eyes. He signaled for backup quietly, ensuring the capture would be clean and public exposure minimized. The operation had escalated far beyond a typical raid. This was a strike at the heart of corruption itself. As the breach occurred, Luis Herrera was apprehended, and the remaining gang members were taken down or forced to flee. Alejandro moved quickly, securing evidence and ensuring every captured member's information was documented. The coordinated strike had been a success, but Alejandro knew the gang's core leaders were still out there, dangerous and relentless. By nightfall, Alejandro returned to Sophia's hospital room. Though she remained unconscious, he placed the captured evidence and intel near her bedside, whispering, "We struck today, Sophia. Step by step, we're bringing them down. Your last wish is alive in every move we make." Even in silence, her presence continued to guide him, a moral compass in a city consumed by crime. Alejandro returned to the precinct late at night, exhausted but triumphant. The coordinated strike had been a success, yet a gnawing unease settled in his chest. Something didn't sit right with the operations reports. There were discrepancies in the gang members' movements and timings that didn't match the intel Cobra had provided. Alejandro frowned, tracing lines on the map again, his instincts screaming that someone inside the team had compromised the mission. He decided to investigate quietly. Alejandro reviewed CCTV footage of the strike and cross-referenced each officer's movements. One figure stood out. An officer who had supposedly secured the perimeter at Luis Herrera's safe house had been seen stepping away from the designated post multiple times, appearing near gang escape routes. Alejandro's jaw tightened. Trust had been broken, and the consequences could be catastrophic. He called Marta into his office, explaining the situation in low tones. "I think someone inside is feeding information to the gang. It's subtle, but it's there. We can't confront them directly yet, or we risk blowing the entire investigation." Marta's eyes widened, shock and concern mixing with determination. Alejandro knew that betrayal from within could undo everything they had worked for and endanger Sophia's last wish. Alejandro devised a careful plan to identify the traitor. He set up controlled leaks of misinformation, planting false intel about a decoy safe house. He watched closely, monitoring which team members reacted suspiciously, who adjusted positions unexpectedly, and who might have passed information to the gang. The stakes were high. Any wrong move could tip off both the mole and the gang's core leaders. Within hours, the mole's pattern emerged. Officer Jamie Vargas, trusted and respected, had been manipulating minor operations, subtly leaking information that allowed gang members to escape or reposition. Alejandro's stomach churned with anger and betrayal. The danger wasn't just external. The gang now had eyes inside the very force meant to stop them. Alejandro confronted Vargas quietly, choosing a secluded room in the precinct. "I know what you've been doing," Alejandro said calmly but firmly. "You've endangered every operation, every officer, and Sophia's last wish. Explain yourself." Vargas sneered, denying everything, but Alejandro had the evidence: surveillance footage, cross-reference logs, and patterns only a meticulous detective could uncover. By the end of the night, Alejandro had secured Vargas and ensured he could no longer jeopardize the investigation. The betrayal stung, but Alejandro's resolve strengthened. He whispered to himself, a vow echoing through the empty precinct. "No one can stop justice, not the gang, not corrupt officials, not even traitors in our own ranks. Sophia will get her last wish." Alejandro spread the newly obtained intel from the raids and Vargas's betrayal across the large crime board in his apartment. Patterns emerged like constellations in a dark sky. One location stood out: a remote warehouse on the outskirts of Mexico City, isolated, heavily guarded, and never mentioned before. His pulse quickened. This was the gang's hidden headquarters, the heart of the gang of Zumba. Every kidnapping, every murder, every move traced back here. Sophia's last wish was within reach, and so was the greatest danger Alejandro had ever faced. He shared the intel with Marta and the tactical team. "This is it. The gang's core operations are centralized here. Any step inside will be lethal, but if we succeed, we cut the head off the snake." Marta nodded, determination shining in her eyes. Alejandro felt the weight of responsibility. The lives of the remaining hostages, the city's safety, and Sophia's silent plea all hung in the balance. Under the cover of night, Alejandro's team approached the warehouse in unmarked vehicles. The outskirts were eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. Alejandro felt his heartbeat sync with the distant sounds of the city, each step forward amplifying the stakes. From the surveillance intel, they knew guards rotated every 10 minutes, sniper positions were placed on elevated rooftops, and escape routes were meticulously planned by the gang. Every detail was a trap waiting to spring. Alejandro signaled the start of the operation. One by one, officers breached the perimeter, moving silently, shadows blending with the night. Alejandro's eyes scanned every corner, anticipating ambushes, listening for the faintest sound. The gang, unaware of the approach, was preparing for the next phase of their criminal enterprise. Unbeknownst to them, the hunters had become the predators. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of crates, corridors, and hidden rooms. Alejandro and his team moved like shadows, neutralizing sentries quietly. But deeper inside, the real threat awaited. El Lobo, the gang leader, orchestrating plans with Cobra and La Serpiente. Alejandro's heart pounded. Every step forward brought them closer to the final confrontation, and the danger escalated with each breath. Suddenly, an alarm blared. One careless gang member had triggered a sensor. Alejandro's team froze for a heartbeat before moving decisively. Gunfire erupted in controlled bursts, lights flickered, and chaos erupted. Alejandro advanced, relying on training, instinct, and every ounce of courage. This was the moment where Sophia's last wish hung in the balance. Every life in the warehouse depended on the precision, bravery, and strategy Alejandro had spent months cultivating. By the end of the night, the hidden headquarters had been breached, gang members captured or neutralized, and key evidence secured. Alejandro stood in the center of the warehouse, breathing heavily, adrenaline surging. He knew this was only the beginning. The core of the gang had been shaken, but El Lobo remained. Still, Sofia's last wish had taken a tangible step closer to reality. Alejandro whispered softly, almost to himself. "We're getting there, Sofia. We're almost there." Alejandro navigated the warehouse's inner corridors, Marta covering his flank. Every step was measured, every shadow analyzed. Ahead, he could hear voices gruff, commanding, unmistakably El Lobo. Alejandro's heart pounded, but he pushed fear aside. After months of pursuit, months of following clues and surviving ambushes, the moment of truth had arrived. This was the man responsible for Sofia's coma, the Justin's deaths, and untold suffering across Mexico City. As they rounded a corner, Alejandro came face to face with El Lobo. Masked, imposing, and exuding menace, he gestured for his remaining gang members to stand down. Alejandro held his ground, voice steady. "It's over, Lobo. No more running, no more hiding. Justice ends here." The silence was heavy, each second stretching as tension crackled between predator and hunter. El Lobo smirked, taunting Alejandro. "You think you can stop me? You've been chasing shadows your whole life." Alejandro remained unmoved, focusing on every detail, the gang leader's stance, his surroundings, possible escape routes. This wasn't just a physical confrontation, it was a battle of wits and nerve. Alejandro's mind raced through strategies, weighing every option carefully. Suddenly, El Lobo lunged toward a hidden weapon. Alejandro reacted instantly, blocking the attack and disarming him with a swift, precise maneuver. Gunfire echoed as backup officers stormed the corridor, rounding up the remaining gang members. Alejandro held El Lobo at gunpoint, breath heavy, adrenaline coursing. The man who had caused so much pain was finally within reach, powerless against the law. With El Lobo secured, Alejandro collected evidence, recording confessions and connecting all the dots for prosecutors. Every detail mattered: kidnapping plans, accomplices, and the corrupt officials' involvement. Alejandro felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that the files he was securing could finally fulfill Sofia's last wish and bring the gang of Zumba to justice. By dawn, the warehouse was quiet, the gang dismantled, and El Lobo in custody. Alejandro stood outside, the first light of morning illuminating his face, a mix of exhaustion and triumph. He whispered Sofia's name softly. "It's done, we did it, Sofia. Your last wish, it's coming true." For the first time in months, Alejandro allowed himself a moment of quiet relief. The fight was far from over, but a major victory had been won, inching him closer to justice. Alejandro returned to the precinct, dragging the weight of the previous night with him. El Lobo was secured, gang members were in custody, and key evidence was catalogued, but one name still haunted him: Luis Herrera. The corrupt official had escaped direct arrest during the warehouse raid, but Alejandro now had enough evidence to bring him down. The final piece of Sofia's last wish, the full exposure of the gang of Zumba's network, was within reach. Alejandro coordinated a sting operation with internal affairs and trusted officers. Every detail mattered: surveillance of Herrera's movements, tactical positioning, and anticipation of escape routes. The plan had to be flawless. Alejandro knew that Herrera would be cautious, but the corrupt official couldn't outrun the trail of evidence now stacked against him. As night fell, Herrera left his luxurious home for what he thought was a routine government meeting. Alejandro's team followed silently, keeping distance, yet always ready. Every turn of the car, every pause at traffic lights, was monitored. Alejandro felt the familiar adrenaline. This was the final pursuit, the culmination of months of investigation, betrayal, and relentless determination. At a quiet intersection, the sting was executed. Officers blocked escape routes, and Alejandro approached Herrera calmly but firmly. Luis Herrera, "You're under arrest for colluding with the gang of Zumba and endangering countless lives," he said. Herrera's shock was palpable. He had underestimated Alejandro's resolve and the meticulous evidence trail. The corrupt official realized too late that his network of protection had collapsed. Back at the precinct, Herrera was booked and the evidence catalogued for prosecution. Alejandro compiled every file, every recorded conversation, and every document showing the official's corruption. The gang of Zumba's network, once hidden in shadows and manipulation, was now exposed. Alejandro felt a surge of relief, knowing that Sofia's last wish, to see justice done, was finally being honored. That evening, Alejandro visited Sofia's hospital room. She remained unconscious, but her presence was comforting, a silent witness to the justice being served in her name. Alejandro placed copies of the key evidence near her bedside. "It's done, Sofia. Justice has been served. Your last wish is fulfilled." For the first time, he felt that months of relentless pursuit, danger, and sacrifice had been worth it. Alejandro knew that the fight against crime was never truly over, but tonight, justice had prevailed. The gang of Zumba was dismantled, the corrupt official arrested, and Sofia's last wish honored. Alejandro left the hospital, city lights twinkling ahead, carrying with him the weight of victory and the resolve to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. Alejandro returned to the hospital the next morning, carrying the weight of the previous victories, but also a quiet anticipation. The gang of Zumba was dismantled, the corrupt official in custody, and every piece of evidence had been secured. But Sofia still lay unconscious, her fate uncertain. Alejandro approached her bedside, studying her pale face, fragile beneath the soft glow of the hospital lights. A silent promise formed in his mind. He had fulfilled her last wish. Now, he would hope for her recovery. Suddenly, the heart monitor emitted a faint, steady beep, stronger than before. Alejandro leaned closer, a surge of hope coursing through him. The nurse on duty noticed the subtle change and smiled softly. "She's responding slowly, but she's responding," she said. Alejandro's chest tightened with emotion. After months of relentless pursuit, danger, and loss, Sofia was finally showing signs of life. Alejandro stayed by her side, talking to her softly, as if she could hear every word. "Sofia, we did it. The gang is finished. Justice has been served. Your last wish, it's real now." He recounted every step of the investigation, every raid, and every capture, hoping that his voice would guide her back to consciousness. Hours passed, the room quiet except for his steady voice and the soft beeping of the monitors. By late afternoon, Sofia's eyes fluttered open. Alejandro froze, disbelief and joy mingling in his chest. "Alejandro," she whispered, her voice weak but unmistakable. Alejandro grasped her hand firmly, tears threatening to spill. "Yes, Sofia. You're awake. You're safe now. Justice is done." The hospital room, once heavy with uncertainty, now radiated relief and hope. The next days were filled with gradual recovery. Alejandro visited daily, recounting every detail of the operation and the arrests. Sofia's strength returned slowly, and with it, her spirit. She smiled faintly at Alejandro one morning, whispering, "You kept your promise. You brought justice for the Justins and me." Alejandro nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Her last wish had not only been honored, but had sparked a journey that had tested courage, strategy, and human resilience. Alejandro realized that justice wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about restoring faith, hope, and a sense of safety to those left behind. Sofia's recovery was a symbol of that truth. He whispered softly as he left the room, "This is just the beginning, Sofia. Your last wish has lit a path. And I will continue walking it, for you, for the Justins, and for every life touched by injustice." Alejandro visited Sofia every morning as she slowly regained strength. Each day, she could sit up longer, speak clearly, and smile wider. The hospital room, once heavy with fear and uncertainty, now carried the gentle hum of recovery. Alejandro recounted the final arrests, detailing how every gang member had been brought to justice and how Luis Herrera was now behind bars. Sophia listened intently, tears forming. But this time, they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than despair. As the days passed, Alejandro introduced Sophia to members of the hospital staff who had cared for her during her coma. Each reunion was emotional. Nurses hugged her, doctors exchanged words of encouragement, and even small acts, like holding a stethoscope or reviewing patient charts, reminded Sophia of her passion for nursing. Alejandro watched, quietly proud, as she reclaimed her sense of purpose. One afternoon, Alejandro suggested a quiet walk outside the hospital. The sun was bright, the city alive with noise, but for Alejandro and Sophia, it was a sanctuary. Sophia inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, and whispered, "I feel alive again." Alejandro nodded, silently acknowledging the journey that had brought them here, from tragedy and danger to hope and healing. Alejandro also helped Sophia process the emotional weight of the Justin family tragedy. Together, they went through files, photos, and records, not for vengeance, but to honor their memory. Alejandro explained how each piece of evidence had led to justice, and Sophia quietly nodded, feeling the weight lift from her heart. Their shared moments of reflection brought them closer, a bond forged in courage, loss, and determination. By the end of the week, Sophia was ready to leave the hospital. Alejandro assisted her carefully, guiding her through the steps of recovery outside the controlled environment of the ICU. Each movement, each small triumph, was celebrated. Alejandro felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not just for the victories in the field, but for seeing Sophia reclaim her life. Before leaving, Alejandro turned to Sophia and said softly, "You've been through so much, but justice has been served. Now it's your turn to live, to heal, and to continue your journey. The city is safer because of you, and because of those we've brought to justice." Sophia nodded, her eyes glistening, gratitude and resolve shining through. She had survived, she had recovered, and the last wish she made in her coma had been fully realized. Alejandro walked through the quiet streets of Mexico City at sunrise, the city slowly awakening around him. The gang of Zumba had been dismantled, Luis Herrera was behind bars, and Sophia was finally awake and reclaiming her life. Alejandro felt a deep sense of fulfillment, but also the quiet weight of responsibility. Crime never truly sleeps, and the battle for justice continues every day. Yet, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace, reflecting on the journey from chaos to closure. Sophia, now recovered, visited the Justin family memorial, honoring the lives lost and the strength they had inspired. Alejandro accompanied her, silently observing her emotional journey. Sophia placed flowers at the memorial, her face serene, her heart lighter. Alejandro realized that justice had not just been about arrests or evidence, it had been about restoring dignity, hope, and life to those left behind. As they walked away from the memorial, Alejandro spoke softly. "Sophia, what you went through, what we both went through, shows that courage isn't just about fighting, it's about surviving, healing, and standing up for what's right." Sophia nodded, understanding that the journey they had endured had transformed them both. Alejandro knew that while the city remained unpredictable and dangerous, the impact of their actions would ripple through lives, sparking hope for the future. Alejandro reflected on Sophia's last wish, the wish that had driven him through months of danger, betrayal, and relentless pursuit. Justice had been served, but more importantly, human resilience had been celebrated. Sophia's awakening, the dismantling of the gang, and the exposure of corruption were reminders that courage and persistence could prevail, even in the darkest circumstances. As Sophia returned to the hospital to resume her nursing work, Alejandro watched her from a distance. She smiled and waved, a small but profound gesture of gratitude and strength. Alejandro knew their paths might diverge, but the bond forged through justice, courage, and compassion would remain. The city was safer, and lives had been touched by the relentless pursuit of what was right. Finally, Alejandro turned to the camera, as if speaking directly to the audience. Every life has the power to make a difference. Courage isn't measured by what we face alone, but by how we rise for others. Stand for justice, fight for the innocent, and never underestimate the impact one person can have. The world is full of darkness, but together, we can bring light. The story ends with a sense of hope, justice fulfilled, and a call to action, encouraging viewers to reflect on courage, persistence, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Sophia's last wish was honored, and Alejandro's journey proved that even in the darkest of times, light can prevail. Weeks had passed since the gang of Zumba was dismantled. Alejandro observed the city from a rooftop, reflecting on the ripple effects of the operation. Crime rates in targeted neighborhoods had dropped, and the arrests had shaken corrupt networks. Officers who had once been cautious now moved with renewed confidence, inspired by the success of the raids. Alejandro realized that justice wasn't just about one person, it was about creating a chain reaction, a lasting change that could save lives in ways unseen. Sophia had returned to her nursing duties, her presence inspiring staff and patients alike. She shared stories of resilience and hope, her experience motivating young nurses and reminding everyone that courage and perseverance can triumph even after tragedy. Alejandro visited often, not as a police officer but as a friend, witnessing her reclaim life and purpose. Their bond, forged through danger and determination, now carried a quiet strength, a shared understanding of what justice and survival truly mean. Alejandro also worked to strengthen the community, attending meetings to support victims of crime, encouraging collaboration between citizens and law enforcement. He shared his experiences, emphasizing vigilance, resilience, and the power of speaking up. The gang of Zumba's dismantling had become a symbol, not just of justice, but of the impact one determined officer could have when driven by purpose and moral courage. Even the officers who had doubted him now respected his methods and foresight. Alejandro had shown that strategy, patience, and moral conviction could overcome not only criminal networks, but corruption within the system. The ripple effects of his work continued to grow, inspiring colleagues and citizens alike to act with integrity, vigilance, and courage. As night fell, Alejandro returned to the rooftop, gazing at the city lights. He thought of Sofia, of the Justins, and of every life touched by the struggle against injustice. Alejandro knew that while crime never truly vanished, courage, integrity, and persistence could tip the balance toward hope. The world was not perfect, but their actions had made it better, one life, one choice, one moment at a time. Alejandro walked through Mexico City early in the morning, the streets bathed in soft golden sunlight. The city had moved on, yet every corner carried traces of the struggle they had endured. Gang members arrested, corrupt officials behind bars, and Sofia slowly thriving in her nursing career. Justice had left its mark. Alejandro felt a rare sense of completion, not in ego or pride, but in knowing that lives had been saved and a ripple of hope had been sent through the city. Sofia, now fully recovered, had returned to her passion for nursing, mentoring new nurses and sharing her story of survival and resilience. Alejandro visited often, their bond now stronger than ever, built on trust, courage, and shared experience. She smiled at him, a quiet gratitude shining in her eyes. Alejandro knew that her last wish, justice for the Justins and the dismantling of the gang of Zumba, was fulfilled, and in that fulfillment, they both found a new sense of purpose. Alejandro paused at a rooftop overlooking the city, recalling the months of danger, betrayal, and relentless pursuit. Every night spent planning raids, confronting gang members, and exposing corruption had led to this moment. Justice served, lives restored, and hope reignited. Alejandro knew the fight against crime would continue, but the impact of courage, persistence, and integrity would never fade. This story isn't just about Alejandro, Sofia, or the Justins. It's about what each of us can do when faced with injustice. Courage isn't waiting for someone else to act. It's standing up, speaking out, and fighting for what's right. Every choice you make can ripple through lives you may never even see. Today, I ask you, what will your legacy be? Who will you protect? Who will you stand for? The world is watching, and it needs your courage. Comment below what you learned from this story.